Marcus Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he watched his 8-year-old daughter Emma practice her riding lessons at Riverside Equestrian Center. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty arena. But he wouldn't miss this for the world. Every penny he spent on these lessons came from working double shifts at the construction site. But seeing Emma's face light up when she was on horseback made every sacrifice worth it. "Daddy, did you see that? I jumped over the rail," Emma called out, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she trotted toward him on Buttercup, the gentle mare she'd been learning on for the past 6 months. "I saw it, sweetheart. You're getting so good," Marcus replied, his voice thick with pride. He pulled out his phone to record her next attempt, knowing these moments were precious. As a single father, he'd learned to be both mother and father to Emma, and sometimes he wondered if he was doing enough. The sound of expensive heels clicking on concrete made him turn around. Victoria Sterling, the owner of the Equestrian Center, approached with her usual air of superiority. At 35, she was stunningly beautiful with perfectly styled auburn hair and designer clothes that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Her family had owned this place for 3 generations, and she never let anyone forget it. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying that familiar, condescending tone. "I need to speak with you about Emma's account." Marcus's stomach dropped. He'd been dreading this conversation. Last month had been particularly rough when his work hours were cut due to bad weather, and he'd had to choose between paying for groceries and Emma's riding lessons. The choice was obvious, but it meant falling behind on payments. "I know I'm a bit behind, Miss Sterling, but I can catch up next week. I just got approved for some overtime shifts," he said, trying to keep his voice steady while Emma continued her lesson within earshot. Victoria's perfectly manicured eyebrows rose in what looked like amusement. "A bit behind? Mr. Thompson, you owe 3 months of lesson fees. That's $1,200. She paused, letting the number sink in. "I'm running a business here, not a charity." Heat crept up Marcus's neck. He was a proud man who'd never asked for handouts, even when his ex-wife left him and Emma 3 years ago with nothing but debt and broken promises. He'd worked his way up from nothing, building a reputation as one of the most reliable construction workers in the county, but it was never quite enough to give Emma the life he'd dreamed of for her. "I understand that, ma'am. I'm good for the money. I've never missed a payment without making it up," he said, glancing over at Emma, who was now dismounting Buttercup with the help of Sarah, the riding instructor. Victoria followed his gaze and smirked. "You know, Mr. Thompson, I've been watching you and your daughter for months now. It's quite touching, really, how devoted you are. But devotion doesn't pay bills." She paused, studying him with calculating eyes. "However, I might be willing to make you a deal." Marcus felt a chill despite the heat. Something in her tone warned him that whatever she was about to propose wouldn't be in his favor. "What kind of deal?" Victoria gestured toward the far end of the property where a large paddock held a magnificent black stallion. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the horse was different from the others. It moved with barely contained power, its muscles rippling under its glossy coat. Several danger, do not approach signs hung on the fence. "That's Thunder," Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He's a Frisian stallion worth more than most people's houses. Beautiful, isn't he? Also completely untamed. We've had him for 2 years and no one's been able to ride him for more than a few seconds." Marcus stared at the horse, beginning to understand where this was heading. Thunder paced the paddock like a caged predator, occasionally rearing up and striking the air with his front hooves. "Here's my proposition," Victoria continued, clearly enjoying herself. "If you can ride Thunder for 1 full minute, I'll not only forgive your debt but also pay for Emma's lessons for an entire year. Free riding camps, competitions, everything a little girl could dream of." The offer was too good to be true, which meant there was a catch. A big one. "And if I can't?" Victoria's smile widened. "When you can't, because let's be realistic here, you'll owe me double the current amount. $2,400 to be paid within 30 days or Emma can find somewhere else to ride." Marcus felt the world spinning around him. $2,400 might as well have been $24,000. There was no way he could come up with that kind of money in 30 days. But looking at Emma, who was now brushing Buttercup and chatting animatedly with Sarah about her next lesson, he knew he couldn't bear to disappoint her. "Daddy." Emma ran over, her face flushed with excitement.
"Sarah says I'm ready to try jumping higher fences next week."
"Isn't that amazing?" Marcus's heart ached as he looked down at his daughter's trusting face. She had no idea their whole world might be about to change. "That's wonderful, honey. Victoria watched this exchange with apparent amusement. So, Mr. Thompson, do we have a deal? Or should I start looking for new clients to fill Emma's lesson slots? The threat was clear. Even if he found the money somewhere else, Victoria would make sure Emma wasn't welcome here anymore. This place wasn't just about writing lessons for his daughter. It was where she felt confident and happy, where she'd made friends and discovered her passion. Taking that away from her would break her spirit. Marcus looked back at Thunder, who had stopped pacing and was now staring directly at them, as if he could sense he was being discussed. The horse's dark eyes seemed almost intelligent, but there was something wild and dangerous in them that made Marcus's experienced construction worker instincts scream warnings. When would this happen? He heard himself ask. This Saturday, high noon. I'll even invite some of our other clients to watch. Make it a real show. Victoria's eyes glittered with anticipation. What do you say, Mr. Thompson? Ready to be a hero for your daughter? Marcus swallowed hard, knowing he was about to make either the best or worst decision of his life. Word spread quickly through the small town of Millfield about the challenge Victoria Sterling had issued to Marcus Thompson. By Thursday evening, it seemed like everyone Marcus encountered had heard some version of the story. At the hardware store, old Pete Wilson shook his head sadly while ringing up Marcus's purchase of work gloves. That Sterling woman's got a mean streak wider than the Mississippi, Pete muttered. Her daddy was tough but fair. She's just plain cruel. Marcus nodded but didn't engage. He'd heard similar sentiments from others around town. The Sterling family had always been wealthy, but Victoria had earned a reputation for looking down on working-class families. Several people had stories about her cutting remarks or deliberate snubs. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table reviewing his finances for the 100th time, hoping somehow the numbers would magically change. Emma was in her room doing homework, occasionally calling out math questions for him to help with. Their small apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery wasn't much, but it was home. The smell of fresh bread wafted up through the floorboards every morning, and Mrs. Chen often slipped Emma leftover cookies. His phone rang, interrupting his calculations. The caller ID showed his best friend, Jake Martinez. Marcus, tell me you're not actually going through with this crazy stunt, Jake said without preamble. Hello to you too, Jake. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. I'm serious, man. I heard about Sterling's challenge at the diner tonight. Everyone's talking about it. That horse nearly killed the last guy who tried to ride him. This was news to Marcus. What do you mean? Tony Riggs, you remember him from high school? He works at Sterling's place now. Tried to ride Thunder about 6 months ago on a bet with some of the other stable hands. Horse threw him so hard he broke 3 ribs and his collarbone. Spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Marcus's blood ran cold. He'd assumed Thunder was just spirited, not dangerous. Why didn't anyone tell me this before? Because Victoria Sterling made sure word didn't get around. Bad for business if people knew she kept a killer horse on the property. But Tony's wife works at the hospital and she's been warning anyone who'll listen. After Jake hung up, Marcus stared at the phone, his mind racing. He could back out. No one would blame him for refusing to risk his life for his daughter's riding lessons. But then what? He still owed Victoria $1,200 he didn't have, and she'd made it clear Emma wouldn't be welcome back regardless. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Marcus's mood. Emma chattered excitedly over breakfast, still unaware of what her father was about to attempt. She thought they were just going to watch some of the older students in a demonstration. Can we stop and get flowers for Sarah? Emma asked as they walked toward the equestrian center. It's her birthday next week, and she's been so nice to me. Of course, sweetheart, Marcus replied, though his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. The parking lot was unusually crowded when they arrived. Victoria had apparently made good on her promise to invite spectators. Marcus recognized several faces from around town, including some he'd rather not see. Brad Morrison, a local businessman who'd always treated construction workers like dirt, stood near the fence with a group of other wealthy residents, all looking like they were at some kind of entertainment event. Well, well, if it isn't our brave hero, Victoria called out as Marcus approached. She was dressed impeccably as always, in riding boots that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent, and a crisp white shirt that looked freshly pressed. Emma ran ahead to greet Sarah and some of her riding friends, leaving Marcus alone with Victoria. Up close he could see the excitement in her eyes and it made his stomach turn. This wasn't just about the money for her. She was genuinely enjoying his predicament. Having second thoughts, Mr. Thompson? Victoria asked sweetly. Before Marcus could answer, an old man approached from the direction of the stables. Marcus had seen him around the property before but had never spoken to him. He was probably in his 70s, with weathered hands and kind eyes that seemed out of place in Victoria's domain. "Ms. Sterling," the old man said, touching the brim of his worn baseball cap, "I was wondering if I could have a word with Mr. Thompson before the exhibition." Victoria's expression tightened. "Henry, I don't think that's necessary. Mr. Thompson knows what he's getting into. All the same, ma'am, if you don't mind." There was something in Henry's voice that brooked no argument. Despite his polite tone, Victoria huffed but waved them away. 5 minutes. Then we start." Henry led Marcus away from the crowd toward a quiet corner near the equipment shed. "Son, I've been working with horses for 50 years and I've never seen one quite like Thunder." "Jake Martinez told me about Tony Riggs," Marcus said quietly. Henry nodded grimly. "Tony was lucky. That horse has something dark in him, but—" He paused, studying Marcus carefully. "There are things about Thunder that Victoria doesn't know. Things her father made me promise to keep quiet about." Marcus felt a spark of hope. "What kind of things?" "Thunder wasn't born wild, son. He was broken. Badly. Before the Sterlings bought him, he belonged to a man who used cruel methods to try to tame him. Whips, spurs, starvation. The horse learned to hate humans, to fight back against anyone who tried to ride him." "That doesn't sound like it helps my situation," Marcus said, watching Thunder pace in his paddock. Henry smiled slightly. "Maybe not. But here's what Victoria doesn't know. Thunder responds differently to different kinds of people. The men who've tried to ride him all came at him with force, trying to dominate him. Tony Riggs swaggered over there like he was going to show that horse who was boss. And Thunder can sense fear, but he can also sense something else. Desperation born of love is different from arrogance or greed. That horse has been waiting 2 years for someone to approach him without trying to prove something." Marcus looked toward where Emma was sitting on the fence, watching some of the other horses with rapt attention. "So you're saying I might have a chance?" "I'm saying," Henry replied carefully, "that sometimes broken things recognize each other. And sometimes, just sometimes, they can help heal each other." Before Marcus could ask what he meant, Victoria's voice rang out across the property. "Time's up, gentlemen. Let's get this show started." As they walked back toward the crowd, Henry placed a weathered hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Whatever happens, son, remember that horse is just as scared as you are. Maybe more so." The crowd had grown larger while Marcus spoke with Henry. Nearly 40 people now lined the fence around Thunder's paddock, their voices creating a low buzz of anticipation. Marcus noticed several people holding up phones, ready to record whatever was about to happen. The thought of his potential humiliation being shared on social media made his palms sweat. Emma had found a spot right at the front of the fence, her small hands gripping the top rail as she looked around in confusion. "Daddy, why is everyone here?" "I thought we were just watching regular riding lessons." Before Marcus could answer, Victoria stepped into the center of the gathered crowd, clearly reveling in her role as master of ceremonies. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming out on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. As many of you know, we have a very special event today." She gestured dramatically toward Thunder, who had stopped pacing and was now standing perfectly still, his ears pinned back as he surveyed the crowd. "This magnificent stallion has remained unridden for 2 years. Several experienced riders have tried and failed to tame him. Today, Mr. Marcus Thompson has accepted a challenge to ride Thunder for 1 full minute." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus heard someone say his name, followed by what sounded like skeptical laughter. His face burned with embarrassment, but he forced himself to keep looking straight ahead. "The stakes," Victoria continued with obvious pleasure, "are quite high. Success means Mr. Thompson's daughter gets free riding lessons for a year. Failure means, well, let's just say failure isn't really an option for him." Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Daddy, what's she talking about? You don't know how to ride horses." The innocent trust in his daughter's voice nearly broke his heart. She was right. He'd never been on a horse in his life. His own father had died when Marcus was 12, and his mother had worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. There'd been no money for riding lessons or summer camps or any of the experiences he so desperately wanted to give Emma. "Sometimes, honey, daddies have to try new things," he said, kneeling down to her level. No matter what happens, I want you to know that I love you more than anything in this world. Emma's brow furrowed with worry. Are you going to get hurt? I'm going to be very careful, Marcus promised, though he wasn't sure how much truth there was in that statement. Victoria clapped her hands to regain everyone's attention. Mr. Thompson, are you ready to meet your destiny? The theatrical nature of her words made several spectators chuckle, but Marcus could see the cold calculation in her eyes. This wasn't entertainment for her. It was revenge against everyone she considered beneath her station. He represented every working-class parent who dared to want something better for their children. I'm ready, Marcus said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Henry appeared at his side carrying a worn leather saddle and bridle. I took the liberty of selecting the equipment, the old man said quietly. This saddle belonged to Thunder's original owner before things went bad. Sometimes familiar scents can be calming. Victoria's eyes flashed with annoyance. That won't be necessary, Henry. We have newer equipment. With respect, Ms. Sterling, you said Mr. Thompson could ride the horse. You didn't specify what equipment he had to use. Henry's voice remained polite, but there was steel underneath. While Victoria fumed, Marcus studied the saddle Henry had chosen. It was old but well-maintained, the leather soft and supple from years of use. Something about it felt right in a way he couldn't explain. The walk to Thunder's paddock felt like a death march. With each step, the horse seemed to grow larger and more intimidating. Up close, Thunder was truly magnificent and terrifying. His coat was so black it seemed to absorb light, and his dark eyes held an intelligence that was almost human. Easy now, Henry murmured as they approached the gate. Let him see you first. Don't make any sudden movements. Thunder's ears swiveled toward them and he snorted loudly, steam rising from his nostrils in the cool morning air. The horse was enormous, at least 17 hands tall, with muscles that rippled under his glossy coat. Scars on his flanks told the story of his abuse, thin white lines that spoke of whips and cruelty. He's beautiful, Marcus said softly, and to his surprise he meant it. Thunder's ears pricked forward at the sound of his voice, and the horse took a tentative step closer. Henry opened the gate slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. That's it, Henry whispered. He's curious about you. That's good. Marcus entered the paddock with his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Thunder stood about 20 feet away, watching him with those intelligent dark eyes. The horse was completely still except for the occasional flick of his tail. Talk to him, Henry advised from just outside the fence. Let him hear your voice. Hello, Thunder, Marcus said, feeling slightly foolish but willing to try anything. I'm Marcus. I guess we're both in a tough spot here. To his amazement, Thunder's ears tilted forward and the horse took another step closer. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something unexpected was happening. That's right, Marcus continued, gaining confidence. We're both just trying to do our best, aren't we? You don't want to hurt anyone and I don't want to get hurt. Maybe we can work something out. Thunder was now close enough that Marcus could see his reflection in the horse's dark eyes. There was wariness there and pain, but also something else. A kind of weary resignation that Marcus recognized all too well. It was the same look he saw in his own mirror every morning when he wondered how he was going to make everything work. I have a little girl, Marcus said softly, extending his hand slowly. Her name is Emma, and she loves horses more than anything in the world. I'm not here to hurt you or prove I'm tough. I'm just a dad trying to give his daughter something beautiful. Thunder stretched his neck forward and sniffed Marcus's outstretched hand. His breath was warm and surprisingly sweet. Then, to everyone's amazement, the great stallion lowered his massive head and gently nuzzled Marcus's palm. The crowd gasped, and Marcus heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath. Even Henry looked surprised. Well, I'll be damned, someone whispered from the fence. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes as Thunder continued to nuzzle his hand. In that moment, he understood what Henry had meant about broken things recognizing each other. This wasn't about dominance or showing off. It was about two wounded souls finding a moment of understanding. The silence stretched on as Thunder continued to explore Marcus with gentle curiosity, sniffing his shirt and running his soft muzzle along his arm. Marcus had never experienced anything like this connection with an animal, and for a moment, he forgot about the crowd watching them. That's impossible, Victoria's voice cut through the quiet, sharp with disbelief and anger. That horse has never let anyone get that close without attacking. Henry stepped closer to the fence, his weathered face creased with wonder. In 50 years of working with horses, I've never seen anything quite like this. Thunder stepped back slightly and turned his head toward the crowd, his ears flicking back and forth as if he was assessing the situation. Marcus could see the tension returning to the horse's posture as he became aware of all the eyes on him. "It's okay, boy," Marcus said softly. "They're just watching. Nobody's going to hurt you." But Thunder was no longer the calm, curious animal he'd been moments before. The presence of the crowd seemed to remind him of whatever trauma he'd endured. He began to pace again, his hooves striking the ground with sharp, agitated sounds. Henry quickly entered the paddock, carrying the saddle and bridle. "We need to do this now while he's still somewhat calm," he said urgently. "Once he gets worked up, there'll be no reaching him." Marcus nodded, though his mouth had gone completely dry. The magical moment of connection was fading and reality was crashing back. He was about to attempt to ride a horse that had hospitalized the last man who tried. "Easy, Thunder," Marcus murmured as Henry approached with the tack. "We're still friends, right?" Thunder's ears swiveled toward Marcus's voice, but his eyes were now wild with growing panic. The horse's breathing had become rapid and shallow, and foam was starting to appear at the corners of his mouth. "He's remembering," Henry said quietly as he slowly lifted the saddle. The saddle, the crowd, men trying to control him. "We have to be very careful here." The moment Henry moved toward Thunder with the saddle, everything changed. The horse reared up on his hind legs, his front hooves pawing the air dangerously close to Marcus's head. Several people in the crowd screamed, and Marcus heard Emma's frightened voice calling his name. "Get out of there," someone shouted from the fence. But Marcus stood his ground, his construction worker instincts kicking in. He'd faced dangerous situations before. Unstable scaffolding, falling debris, equipment failures that could kill a man in seconds. This was different, but the principle was the same. Stay calm, think clearly, and don't panic. "Thunder," Marcus said firmly but gently. "Look at me. Look at me, not at them." The horse came down hard on his front legs, snorting and shaking his massive head, but his eyes found Marcus's, and for a moment, the wildness seemed to recede slightly. "That's right," Marcus continued, taking a small step closer despite every survival instinct screaming at him to run. "It's just you and me here. Forget about everyone else." Henry, showing remarkable courage for a man his age, continued his slow approach with the saddle. "Keep talking to him, son. Your voice is the only thing keeping him from losing it completely." "I know you're scared," Marcus said to Thunder. "I'm scared too. But we're going to get through this together. I'm not like the men who hurt you before. I don't want to break you or dominate you. I just need your help for 1 minute. Can you give me that?" Thunder's breathing began to slow slightly, though he continued to shift restlessly from hoof to hoof. When Henry finally placed the saddle on his back, the horse tensed but didn't explode into violence as everyone expected. The process of saddling Thunder took nearly 10 minutes, with Henry moving with infinite patience, while Marcus kept up a steady stream of quiet conversation. The crowd grew restless, with some people checking their phones and others starting to leave, apparently deciding the show wasn't exciting enough. Victoria, however, remained riveted to the scene. Marcus could see her growing agitation as it became clear that Thunder wasn't going to provide the spectacular disaster she'd been hoping for. "Mr. Thompson," she called out, her voice tight with frustration, "we don't have all day. Either get on that horse or forfeit the bet." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked over at Emma, who was still pressed against the fence, her young face pale with worry. Their entire future hinged on the next few minutes. "All right, Thunder," Marcus said, approaching the horse's side. "This is it. I'm going to trust you, and I need you to trust me." Henry had positioned a mounting block near Thunder's side, but even with the boost, Marcus would need to swing his leg over a very tall, very unpredictable animal. As he stepped onto the block, Thunder's muscles tensed and the horse turned his head to watch Marcus with one large, dark eye. "Easy," Marcus whispered, placing his hand on the saddle horn. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." The moment Marcus's weight settled into the saddle, Thunder went completely still. It was an eerie calm, like the eye of a hurricane. Marcus could feel the coiled power beneath him, the barely contained energy of a creature that could end his life with one violent buck. "Good boy," Marcus breathed, hardly daring to move. "That's perfect. Just stay calm." Henry backed away slowly, his eyes never leaving the horse. "You're doing great, son. Just sit easy and let him get used to you. The crowd had gone silent again, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the people who'd been ready to leave had turned back to watch. Thunder began to walk, his movement so smooth it felt like floating. Marcus had expected the jarring, bouncing ride he'd seen in movies, but this was completely different. The horse moved with a fluid grace that was almost hypnotic. 30 seconds, Victoria called out, her voice strained. But Marcus barely heard her. He was focused entirely on Thunder, on the subtle shifts in the horse's muscles that telegraphed his intentions. They made one slow circuit of the paddock, then another. Thunder's ears remained forward, alert but not aggressive. 50 seconds, Victoria announced, and now her voice held a note of disbelief. Marcus felt Thunder's pace quicken slightly, but it wasn't the explosive acceleration he'd feared. Instead, it felt controlled, almost playful. The horse was testing him, seeing if he would panic or try to fight for control. 1 minute, Henry shouted, his voice filled with joy and amazement. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, but Marcus barely registered the noise. He was still focused on Thunder, on maintaining the delicate balance of trust they'd created. As he prepared to dismount, Thunder came to a gentle stop right beside the mounting block, as if he understood exactly what was needed. Marcus's legs shook as he dismounted, the adrenaline finally catching up with him. His hands trembled as he patted Thunder's neck, still hardly believing what had just happened. The great stallion turned his head and nuzzled Marcus's shoulder gently, as if to say goodbye. The crowd was going wild, people cheering and clapping as if they'd just witnessed a miracle, and in a way they had. Emma had climbed through the fence rails and was running toward him, her face shining with pride and excitement. "Daddy, Daddy, you did it! You rode Thunder." She threw herself into his arms and Marcus held her tight, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "I can't believe it," someone was saying. "That horse nearly killed Tony Riggs, and this guy rides him like they're old friends." Marcus looked around at the amazed faces surrounding the paddock. Henry was grinning from ear to ear, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Even some of the wealthy spectators who'd clearly come expecting to see him fail were shaking their heads in wonder. But Victoria Sterling's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. She stood rigid near the fence, her knuckles white as she gripped the top rail. When the initial excitement died down, she stalked into the center of the group, her heels clicking sharply on the ground. "That was impressive, Mr. Thompson," she said through gritted teeth. "However, I'm afraid there were some irregularities in the challenge." The crowd fell silent, sensing drama. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He should have known Victoria wouldn't honor the bet gracefully. "What kind of irregularities?" Henry asked, his voice deceptively mild but with an edge of warning. Victoria lifted her chin defiantly. "For one thing, Mr. Thompson used unauthorized equipment. I specifically said he could ride Thunder, not that he could use whatever saddle he wanted." "You didn't specify any restrictions on equipment," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice level despite his growing anger. "Secondly," Victoria continued, ignoring his protest, "the challenge was to ride Thunder, not to take a gentle walking tour of the paddock. Real riding involves speed control, demonstrating mastery over the animal." The crowd began to murmur and Marcus could see people taking sides. Some looked outraged at Victoria's obvious attempt to weasel out of the deal, while others seemed to think she had a point. "That's complete nonsense," Henry said, stepping forward. "The challenge was to stay on Thunder for 1 minute, and that's exactly what Marcus did." "According to whose definition of riding?" Victoria shot back. "My property, my horse, my rules." Marcus felt his heart sinking. He'd known this was too good to be true. Victoria Sterling was powerful and wealthy, and people like him didn't win against people like her. Emma was still holding his hand, looking up at him with confused eyes that broke his heart. "Ms. Sterling," a new voice interrupted, and everyone turned to see a tall, distinguished man in his 60s approaching the group. Marcus recognized him as Judge Robert Hamilton, one of the most respected men in the county. Victoria's face went pale. "Judge Hamilton, I didn't realize you were here. Mrs. Hamilton and I were driving by when we saw the crowd," the judge said pleasantly. "We decided to stop and see what all the excitement was about." "Quite a show, Mr. Thompson, most impressive." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Thank you, sir." Judge Hamilton turned to Victoria with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Sterling, I couldn't help but overhear your concerns about the irregularities in the challenge. As someone who's presided over contract disputes for 30 years, I find your position quite interesting." Victoria's jaw tightened. Judge Hamilton, this is a private matter. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, the judge interrupted smoothly. You issued this challenge publicly with witnesses. That makes it a verbal contract, legally binding in the state of Texas. And I heard you quite clearly state that if Mr. Thompson could ride Thunder for 1 minute, you would forgive his debt and pay for his daughter's riding lessons for a year. But the conditions weren't met, Victoria protested weakly. Judge Hamilton pulled out his phone. Fortunately, my grandson was recording the entire event for his social media. Let's review exactly what was said, shall we? As the judge scrolled through his phone, finding the video, Victoria's face grew increasingly ashen. Marcus realized that whatever power plays and intimidation tactics she was used to employing weren't going to work with someone of Judge Hamilton's stature. Ah, here we are, the judge said, pressing play. Victoria's voice rang out clearly from the phone speaker. If you can ride Thunder for 1 full minute, I'll not only forgive your debt but also pay for Emma's lessons for an entire year. The judge looked up with raised eyebrows. No mention of speed requirements, equipment restrictions, or definitions of what constitutes proper riding. Just ride Thunder for 1 minute, which Mr. Thompson accomplished admirably. The crowd was now openly hostile toward Victoria, with several people voicing their displeasure at her attempt to cheat Marcus out of his victory. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for these neighbors and strangers who were willing to stand up for what was right. But Victoria Sterling wasn't finished yet. Even if the technical requirements were met, she said desperately, the spirit of the challenge clearly wasn't. This was meant to be a test of horsemanship, not a publicity stunt. The spirit of the challenge, Judge Hamilton replied coldly, was to humiliate a hard-working father in front of his daughter and your wealthy friends. Mr. Thompson not only met your challenge but did so with more grace and dignity than you're showing in defeat. The words hung in the air like a judgment, and Victoria flinched as if she'd been slapped. Around them, people began to nod and voice their agreement. Furthermore, the judge continued, I find your behavior this afternoon to be a poor reflection on your family's legacy. Your father, God rest his soul, was a man of honor who kept his word. He would be deeply disappointed in this display. Victoria's face crumpled at the mention of her father. For a moment, the mask of cold superiority slipped, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something vulnerable underneath. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by renewed defiance. Fine, she said bitterly. The debt is forgiven and the girl can have her lessons. But don't expect any special treatment beyond that. Judge Hamilton smiled grimly. I think you'll find, Ms. Sterling, that word of today's events will spread quickly through our community. People remember how you treat others, especially hard-working parents trying to provide for their children. As if to prove his point, several people in the crowd were already on their phones, no doubt sharing videos and stories of what they'd witnessed. Marcus realized that Victoria's reputation in the community would never recover from this public humiliation. Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve. Daddy, does this mean I can keep taking riding lessons? Yes, sweetheart, Marcus said, kneeling down to hug her. You can keep riding for as long as you want. As the crowd began to disperse, Henry approached Marcus with a thoughtful expression. Son, I've been thinking about what happened here today. That connection you made with Thunder, it's not something that can be taught. Marcus looked back at the paddock where Thunder was now grazing peacefully, as if the dramatic events of the afternoon had never happened. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. What I mean, Henry said with a slow smile, is that you might want to consider learning to ride properly. That horse has been waiting 2 years for someone who understands him. I think he's found that person. The idea was tempting, but Marcus shook his head. I appreciate the thought, Henry, but I can barely afford Emma's lessons, even with them being free now. I couldn't possibly. Who said anything about you paying? Henry interrupted. Thunder needs someone who can work with him, help him heal from whatever trauma he's carrying. In exchange, I'd be happy to teach you everything I know about horses. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. The possibility of learning to ride, of sharing that incredible connection with Thunder again, was more appealing than he wanted to admit. But before he could respond, Victoria's voice cut through their conversation like a knife. Absolutely not, she said sharply, having apparently overheard their discussion. Mr. Thompson got what he came for. He has no business on my property beyond bringing his daughter for lessons. Henry's expression hardened. Victoria, that horse has been nothing but trouble for 2 years. Marcus might be the key to— The answer is no, Victoria said firmly. And if Mr. Thompson or anyone else has a problem with that decision, they're welcome to find another stable. The threat was clear, and Marcus felt his brief hope crumble. Victoria still held all the power here, and she was making sure everyone knew it. Even in defeat, she was finding ways to punish him for embarrassing her. "It's all right, Henry," Marcus said quietly. "Emma's lessons are what matter. That's enough for me." But as they walked toward the parking lot, Marcus couldn't help but glance back at Thunder one more time. The magnificent stallion had lifted his head from grazing and was watching them leave, his dark eyes somehow conveying a sense of loss that made Marcus's chest tight with emotion. Emma chattered excitedly about her upcoming lessons as they drove home, but Marcus was quiet, lost in thought about what might have been. He'd tasted something extraordinary today, a connection with an animal that defied explanation. Walking away from that felt like abandoning a part of himself he hadn't even known existed. That evening, as Emma did her homework at the kitchen table, Marcus sat staring out the window at the darkening sky. His phone buzzed with text messages from friends and coworkers who'd heard about his incredible ride, all congratulating him on his victory over Victoria Sterling. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the beginning of something that had been cut short before it could truly bloom. Thunder was still trapped in that paddock, still carrying the scars of his past, still waiting for someone who understood him. And Marcus was back to his old life of construction work and making ends meet, with nothing changed except that Emma could continue her riding lessons. It should have been enough, but somehow it wasn't. 3 weeks after the challenge, Marcus was finishing up a roofing job when his foreman, Dave Rodriguez, approached him with an unusual expression on his weathered face. "Marcus, you got a visitor down at the office," Dave said, removing his hard hat and scratching his gray hair. "Some lawyer type in an expensive suit. Says it's urgent." Marcus felt his stomach drop. His first thought was that Victoria Sterling had found some way to get back at him, maybe claiming he'd damaged Thunder or violated some obscure property law. "Did he say what it was about?" "Nope. Just that he needed to speak with you privately. Better head on down there." The company trailer that served as their field office was parked at the edge of the construction site. As Marcus approached, he could see a tall man in a navy suit standing beside a luxury sedan, checking his watch impatiently. The contrast between the lawyer's pristine appearance and the dusty, chaotic construction site was almost comical. "Mr. Thompson?" The man extended a manicured hand. "I'm Jonathan Pierce, senior partner at Pierce Morrison & Associates. I represent the estate of Victoria Sterling." Marcus felt the world tilt around him. "Estate? What do you mean, estate?" Mr. Pierce's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, I assumed you'd heard. Ms. Sterling died 4 days ago in a car accident. Single vehicle crash on Highway 35, apparently lost control in the rain." The news hit Marcus like a physical blow. Despite everything that had happened between them, Victoria Sterling was only 35 years old. It seemed impossible that someone so vibrant and willful could simply be gone. "I'm very sorry to hear that," Marcus managed, "but I'm not sure why you need to speak with me." Mr. Pierce pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. "That's what makes this so unusual, Mr. Thompson. You're mentioned in Ms. Sterling's will. Quite prominently, actually." Marcus stared at the envelope as if it might explode. "That doesn't make any sense. She barely knew me, and what she did know she didn't like." "Apparently, Ms. Sterling had a change of heart in her final weeks," the lawyer said, opening the envelope and extracting several official-looking documents. "She revised her will just 10 days ago. According to my notes, she said she wanted to right a wrong and honor her father's memory." The lawyer handed Marcus a letter with his name written on the front in Victoria's precise handwriting. With trembling fingers, Marcus opened it and began to read. "Mr. Thompson, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and perhaps that is for the best. I have spent the last 3 weeks thinking about what happened the day you rode Thunder, and I have come to realize some uncomfortable truths about myself. My father built this equestrian center to bring joy to children and families, regardless of their economic status. In the years since his death, I have perverted his vision, turning it into a playground for the wealthy while excluding people like you and Emma. Your display of courage and compassion that day showed me what real strength looks like. It also showed me how small and petty I had become. I watched you risk everything for your daughter's happiness, and I was ashamed of my own behavior. Thunder responded to you in a way he has never responded to anyone else. My stable manager, Henry Walsh, believes this is because you approached him without arrogance or the need to dominate. You saw a wounded creature and offered understanding instead of force. Therefore, I am leaving Thunder to you, along with the funds necessary for his care and training. I am also establishing a trust fund for Emma's education, so that she may pursue whatever dreams she chooses, without the financial constraints that have limited your own opportunities. Finally, I am deeding the back 40 acres of the property to you, along with the small cabin that sits on it. It's not much, but it should provide you and Emma with a stable home and room for Thunder to roam. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive a foolish woman who learned too late the difference between wealth and worth. Victoria Sterling Marcus read the letter 3 times, certain he was hallucinating. Mr. Pierce watched patiently, occasionally checking his phone. This can't be real, Marcus finally said. People don't just give away horses and property to strangers. I assure you it's quite real, Mr. Pierce replied. Ms. Sterling was very specific about her intentions. The property transfer alone is worth approximately $400,000. The education trust for Emma contains another $200,000, and there's an additional $50,000 set aside for Thunder's care. Marcus felt dizzy. These numbers were beyond his comprehension. But why? Why would she do this? Mr. Pierce closed his briefcase with a sharp click. People often make surprising decisions when they're facing their own mortality. Mr. Thompson, Ms. Sterling may have realized she wanted to be remembered for something other than her cruelty. That evening, Marcus sat Emma down at their small kitchen table and tried to explain what had happened. Her young face cycled through confusion, sadness about Victoria's death, and then explosive excitement about the possibilities ahead. We're going to live on a ranch? She asked, her eyes wide. With Thunder? And I can ride him whenever I want? Well, I'll need to learn how to take proper care of him first, Marcus said, still struggling to believe any of this was real. And you'll need to keep taking lessons to become a better rider. But yes, if everything works out, Thunder will be ours. Emma threw her arms around his neck. This is the best thing that's ever happened to us. Marcus held his daughter close, but his emotions were complicated. Relief and gratitude warred with guilt about Victoria's death, and uncertainty about the future. He'd never owned anything more valuable than his pickup truck, and now he was supposedly the owner of a magnificent horse and 40 acres of prime Texas land. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work and drove to Riverside Equestrian Center for the first time since the challenge. Henry was waiting for him in the parking lot, his weathered face creased with a mixture of sadness and hope. I heard about Victoria's will, the old man said as they walked toward Thunder's paddock. Can't say I was entirely surprised. She'd been asking a lot of questions about you and Emma since that day you rode him. Thunder was standing in the shade of a large oak tree, but the moment he saw Marcus approaching, his ears pricked forward and he trotted to the fence. The greeting was as gentle as Marcus remembered, with the great stallion nuzzling his hand and nickering softly. He's been waiting for you, Henry observed. Every day since the challenge, he stands by this fence around the time you usually brought Emma for her lessons. Almost like he knew you'd be back. Marcus stroked Thunder's neck, marveling again at the connection he felt with this magnificent animal. Henry, I need to ask you something. Victoria's will says you're to be retained as stable manager if I accept the inheritance. Would you be willing to teach me everything about caring for horses? Henry's face broke into a wide grin. Son, I've been waiting 50 years for someone to ask me that question with the right heart behind it. When can we start? As Marcus stood there in the Texas sunshine, with Thunder's warm breath on his face and the promise of a new life spreading out before him like an endless horizon, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Emma was born. Genuine hope for the future. The road ahead would be challenging. He'd need to learn about horse care, property management, and a dozen other skills he'd never needed as a construction worker. But for the first time in his adult life, he had the resources to provide Emma with opportunities he'd only dreamed of. More importantly, he'd found his calling in the most unexpected place. The connection he'd felt with Thunder that dramatic afternoon wasn't a fluke or a moment of luck. It was the beginning of something profound, a partnership between two souls who understood what it meant to be broken and were ready to help each other heal. Emma would grow up on a real ranch, learning to ride and care for horses, with a college fund that would let her pursue any dream she chose. And Marcus would spend his days working with Thunder and other horses. using the gift he'd discovered to help wounded animals find their way back to trust. It was an ending that Victoria Sterling could never have imagined when she issued her cruel challenge. But perhaps that was exactly the point. Sometimes the most beautiful transformations come from the most unlikely beginnings.